Okay. This is Miriam Raftery with East County Magazine, and I am delighted today to have our special guest, investigative journalist and author Greg Palast. He's written several New York Times best-selling books, and he's a national expert on election integrity issues. He's been involved in filing some legal challenges to restore voting rights for people who were found to have been wrongly purged off voting rolls in key swing states. And just recently, the ACLU issued his report, Georgia Voter Roll Purge Errors, which identified over 198,000 voters wrongly removed, mostly people of color. He runs the Greg Palast Investigative Fund, which you can find at gregpalast.com, and he's also won a whole bunch of awards for his journalism work. And today he's here to talk about the 2020 election. So Greg, welcome.
Glad to be with you again, Miriam.
It's always a pleasure. So let's start. President Donald Trump has been calling this outcome election fraud, filing legal challenges all over the place. Greg is a longtime expert on these things. How confident are you in the outcome, which as of today has Joe Biden as the winner with about a 5 million vote margin and 306 electoral votes?
Well, I'm not confident at all because right now, Donald Trump is spending a lot of time trying to convince states not to certify the vote, saying, oh, I heard Donnie Jr. say the mail-in ballots came from Mars. Well, I checked. They don't sell postage stamps on Mars, so they couldn't have been mailed from Mars. So they're throwing up this smoke and con that there are all these illegal ballots. People swam the Rio Grande to vote. That people swipe mail-in ballots and filled them out. I mean, all this stuff, but they haven't. They literally haven't provided one case, not one, of an illegal ballot. They haven't shown us one ballot, not let alone millions and millions that they need to overcome.
Right. It's kind of shocking that as of today, there's been, I think, at least a dozen court challenges he's filed in all these different states or voters, on behalf of him. And they've all been either thrown out by the judges or, ruled against, or in a couple of cases, they withdrew it themselves for lack of evidence. I mean, normally doesn't one have evidence before you go and file a lawsuit? It's kind of.
Well, okay. Let's not get too arrogant about this and be too confident. Right. He's trying to get the states. It's up to the state legislatures. Read your constitution. There's nothing about voting in the United States Constitution whatsoever.
Really?
Yes. And it says that the electors to choose the president are chosen not by voters, but by state legislatures. That's Article 2 of the Constitution. Our founding fathers did not trust us. So they said it's up to the legislatures. And that's serious stuff because we've had legislatures refuse their voters' will. And they could say, look, we can't tell. There's too many fraudulent ballots. We couldn't observe the count, blah, blah, blah. And so if they can get the Republican legislatures of Pennsylvania and Arizona and Georgia to say, gee, we just can't tell what's going on here, then there'll be no certification of the vote. If there's no certification in a couple of states, 2-3 states, Joe Biden doesn't get 270 electoral votes. Neither does Trump, but then it goes to the
House of
Representatives. And no, Nancy Pelosi does not pick the president out of her sorting hat. It's one vote per state. California gets the same vote as South Dakota. 26 Republican delegations represent a tiny minority of the population of America, but they get to choose. They could choose Donald Trump as our president under the Constitution. That's how it is written.
Do you believe that there's very much likelihood that that would actually happen? I know it's certainly possible, but how likely do you think that is?
Not likely, but either was Trump's election in the first place, which he stole. Okay. So those of you remember my book, my film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy.
Right.
I said Trump was going to steal 2016 and everyone was buying their party dresses for Hillary's inaugural. Remember, they're going to drop the balloons through the glass ceiling.
Yeah, they weren't counting.
Well, how did that work out for you, President Hillary? It didn't. So, once again, we are celebrating before the race is over. We haven't broken the tape.
Right.
That's one. And now, by the way, I'm not even partisan. Pick Trump. You want Trump, but that's fine with me as long as it's a choice of the voters.
Correct.
But it wasn't in 2016. It was stolen. And that's why I wrote a book, How Trump Stole 2020. It was based on 16, and he almost pulled it off here, but he may have stolen the Senate. I'm very concerned about what's going on.
And we're going to get to that with the Georgia races and so forth. But just a very thumbnail background for people who didn't hear the earlier interviews or didn't read your book. What you wrote about was people being thrown off voting rolls wrongly, primarily people of color, people who were Black, Hispanic, Asian, right? Because they said that they were duplicate voters, and yet really it might be similar names, different middle initial, different social security numbers.
Well, there's two groups, actually. One is that they used a system for a while in 30 states called interstate crosscheck. They're looking for people voting twice, those terrible criminals. Yeah. And actually they got a lot of praise from PBS and NPR and NBC and all. They said, oh, this great system for finding double voters. What double voters?
And the movie was great, where you went and tracked down these actual supposed double voters. Yeah. It was like elderly people, grandma, and Willie, a guy named Willie that turned out to be a country music singer. Y'all might know.
So we had Willie Nelson, for example. Willie Nelson, the country singer. He's in my film playing a stoner musician, in other words, himself. And they said he was the same voter as Willie Mae Nelson, a woman in Mississippi, Texas. And so I asked Willie, how'd you get away with voting as a woman with that beard? Was it the pigtails? And, and he said, I don't know what you're high on. I didn't know what he was high on either. But here's the thing is, we had names like Jose Garcia. In Georgia, they removed 567 guys named James Brown, saying that they were registered in other states. And I went to Michigan, and I said, James Brown, Michael Brown, Jose Garcia, you don't realize that these are common names, and not just any common names. 85 of the 100 most common names in America are minority names. Jose Garcia, James Brown, Johnson, Kim, David Kim. How many doctors named David Kim?
So it was an intentional effort, essentially, in your view, to purge minority voters. Now, fast forward to this election. Tell us about this voter purge that you discovered in Georgia that the ACLU, has been all over.
Right. Well, the ACLU with Black Voters Matter issued my report. I went through, after suing the state of Georgia because they were withholding information, I went through the voter rolls of the people that were purged. I had to sue to get those names. We went through and we found out that 198,351 people were wrongly removed from the voter rolls. Their only crime was voting while Black. Well, who are these people? How they get rid of why they get rid of them? Why they say they couldn't vote? Well, I was down in Georgia when they started this purge in 2018. And I was at the Atlanta polling stations when the 92-year-old woman was voting for her 50th year in a row. And they said, scram, you can't vote here anymore. So why? So I looked her up on our list, and she was removed like almost everyone that was removed from this list in Georgia because they said she moved. Well, you can't vote in Atlanta if you don't live in Atlanta.
And do they have any evidence to make them think this person had moved? Or
well, that's the question. So the first thing I did is I questioned her. I said, so I went back to her house that they said she moved out of. There was Martin Luther King's picture on the wall with her at her dining room table. So she had to be there at least 60 years.
Yeah.
I said, so you knew Dr. King? She says, that's my cousin. He came here every Sunday after.
Oh my goodness.
For lunch.
Wow.
And so what happened is, so they accused her of moving. She hadn't moved anywhere. And with another 198,000 people, whose only crime really was voting while Black. I had the Raheem Shabazz, a local broadcaster, so Ashley Jones, a Latina, Jasmine Bakhtiar, a Muslim immigrant. You get the picture. They are figuring out how to get rid of voters of color. And what we found out is that they were using wrong lists. Well, they liked having the wrong list. They don't want the right list. They wanted to get it wrong because it was removing voters of color and young people.
So once you figured this out, you had a positive outcome on this one, Greg, right? Tell us what happened.
Well, partly positive. I mean, well, we don't know yet because we uncovered the 198,000 illegally removed. The ACLU put out that report. Black Voters Matter has been on it. We've sent out 98,000 postcards, by the way, to try to warn people to re-register.
Yeah.
But, it's postcards, it's like people
do we know how many were able to get re-registered?
We don't know, except it's many thousands, and probably because if you go to gregpalast.com, you'll see a 60-second PSA, which is seen by 7 million people so far, and a little longer film, about 14 minutes long, about what's going on in Georgia. And that was released by Leonardo DiCaprio from his Instagram site.
Yeah.
And so we got a tremendous amount of views and coverage, plus the phone calling done by Georgia activists. And now, we're taking whatever legal action we can, but we are really trying to notify people as best we can through publicity and through contacting, phone banking, you name it, to get people to check their registration. Most people, just like Mrs. Jordan, you can't, why should she, after 50 years, be checking her registration before she votes? Everyone should. And by the way, just because you're in California, don't assume that you can vote either. I was purged. I had to re-register. And you always go online. If you see your name missing from the voter rolls, you always check with your Secretary of State or vote.org or gregpalast.com.
Mm-hmm.
If you're missing, go
on.
on.
San Diego, we should say it's sdvote.com.
sdvote.com. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're no longer on the voter rolls, go online, re-register on the spot, and do it right away. In Georgia, there's the runoff. People have to re-register by December 7th for the runoff, which will be January 5.
Right. And we'll talk in a moment about those two key Senate races. But I want to ask you first about the recount in Georgia that the Republican Secretary of State has ordered. They say they're going to hand recount every single ballot. And now this week it's come out that the Secretary of State claims that Republican Senator Lindsey Graham tried to convince him to dump a bunch of Democratic ballots during the recount. I mean, this is really, espionage kind of cloak and dagger sounding stuff.
Well,
Greg. Are you surprised? And what's with this Secretary of State?
What's with this Secretary of State? He's already dumped thousands and thousands and thousands of votes for the Republican Party. He's a Republican hack of the worst order.
So why is he doing
running a Jim Crow operation?
Right.
Let me tell you something. Somehow this is one of the problems I have with our media and Democratic Party, whatever. If Trump or a nutcase like Lindsey Graham attacks someone, they must be a hero. This guy ain't a hero. I just told you he removed 198,000 voters, mostly voters of color and young people. He did his best to fix this election for them. What they're sorry.
So why do you think he's now trashing Lindsey Graham? It's just odd, because you're right. I mean, this Secretary of State has a very nefarious history that's been very well documented.
Yeah. I mean, this guy I had to sue him in court to get the names of the people he removed from the voter rolls and his secret back and forth with a guy named Chris Kobach of Kansas.
Oh yeah.
Who
came up with the cross-check, the other voter.
Yeah, the guy who came up with that cross-check system. And so we needed to open their file. So this guy's been secretive. He's run a racist purge program. And he's also, when you talk about not counting ballots, he's done a very good job of not counting ballots so far. So you understand.
What are you concerned about, if you're concerned about the recount, and how confident do you think people should be in the outcome of this?
I wouldn't be confident at all. But the thing is, okay, let's get this clear now. Joe Biden has won Georgia, and they can recount the ballots 700 times, and Joe Biden will win Georgia. And what Lindsey Graham was hoping to do to pleasure Agent Orange, his president, is to try to get them to throw out more ballots. But you have to understand no one has talked about the fact that they have rejected thousands and thousands and thousands of mail-in ballots. And as you know, the Democratic Party told people to go postal. And
go vote by mail, right?
I just found, according to Gwinnett County, we just spoke to them. Are you ready for this? They've already rejected 30% of mail-in ballots, overwhelmingly Democrats.
So in other words, if Biden wins, so I want to be clear here. What you're saying is that because Trump told his people to go vote at the polls, vote in person, the mail isn't safe, and Democrats were telling people, no, worry about the virus at the polls, go vote by mail, that they got rid of a lot of mailed in ballots. You've seen evidence of this. So if anything, Biden's win in Georgia, if those ballots hadn't been thrown out or purged, would probably have been much, much higher than it is. He won, but he probably won by even, if there was any fraud, it was getting rid of Democratic ballots.
But that's insignificant because you win, you win.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going on here? This guy knows that if you see what Trump was calling for was reviewing all the ballots and whether they should be whether they are qualified ballots. And let me tell you something: if you review those mail-in ballots, the many rejections are going to be reversed. In other words, they stop people postage due. They didn't they challenged a signature.
Mm-hmm.
They used a red pen instead of a blue pen. They tape shut the inside envelope. And if you tape shut your envelope, you could disqualify your ballot. So they come with all these cockamamie reasons to thwart the voter's intent. Whereas the general rule is if you can get the voter's intent and the ballot isn't fraudulent, and there are no fraudulent ballots, they can't, like I say, they can't find one. Those ballots should be counted. So this GOP operatives understands very well. If you start really counting those ballots, really going through which ballots should be rejected and accepted, John Ossoff will be senator because he barely fell short of the 50% plus one vote that he needed to avoid a runoff. You start looking through those ballots carefully, Mr. Graham, Mr. Trump, and there won't be a runoff. And so that's for the Ossoff seat. So believe me, he understands what's going on. They don't. But you know what? I'm really getting sick of Democrats making heroes out of guys just because Trump attacks them. Trump also attacked Lindsey Graham. Is he a hero? I don't think so.
Yeah. So let's talk about the elections that presumably are coming up. The balance of the Senate hangs in the balance of power in the Senate hangs in the balance. Now, it hinges on these two special elections in Georgia, where they had vacancies to fill. The November election there was essentially like a primary. And of course, federal law requires that in congressional elections, you have a runoff. So that's what's happening in January, a runoff election for 2 seats. If the Democrats were to win both of these seats, it would be a 50-50 split in the Senate with Vice President Kamala Harris, assuming Biden is seated as the next president, she would cast the deciding vote. So
that's right.
A lot at stake in these Georgia special elections. So tell us what your concerns are about those, Greg.
Well, I told you 198,000 Georgians illegally removed from the voter rolls. We got tens of thousands back on. Now we got to get the rest on, is number one. And by the way, very interesting, in New York Times, they showed that the percentage of African-American registered voters who came out was as high as when they came out for Barack Obama in 2008. And yet the number of Black people as a percentage of registered voters has declined. How does voter registration among Black people decline? The only way you can do it is unless there was a massive die-off of Black voters, and the coronavirus hasn't been that bad. In fact, what you've had is the erasure of Black voters and Hispanic voters and young voters from the voter rolls. So what I'm concerned with is all these voters who wanted to vote and found out they didn't get a mail-in ballot. They didn't know why, because they were purged, or they went in and they were told you can't vote, or they were shunted to provisional ballots. That's why the exit polls and the polling showed a higher. It wasn't a squeaker if you look at the polls, and the polls are not wrong. Would these pollsters stop apologizing? I used to teach statistics. No, guys, my fellow statisticians, you didn't get it wrong. The polls are correct. The problem is the number of votes which are not counted in America. We never discussed that, Miriam. I mean,
yeah, we should.
According to the Elections Assistance Commission, which is our official agency, which tracks not only voting, but non-voting. And according to the Elections Assistance Commission, 1.9 million ballots were cast in 2016 and never counted. In addition, we had almost 3 million mail-in ballots which were never counted. 3 million, because it's very easy to disqualify a ballot. And we had 2.4 million provisional ballots cast, of which nearly 1 million were never counted By the way, the worst state in America for voting, California, but we'll take that on another day. Believe it or not, the only state I found that makes it harder to vote than any other state in a primary, however, is California.
Now, in what ways?
So I'm not going to say that only Republicans play these games, but Democrats play other games in primaries. But in the general elections, the big trick for Republicans is this mass erasure of votes and this non-count and challenge to mail-in votes, which they've been doing for years. And the Democrats walked right into it by telling people to mail in their ballots.
Yeah.
Mail-in ballots are not secret. Mail-in ballots are not secure. Mail-in ballots don't get counted, Joe Biden. He said, don't worry, mail in your ballots. All the ballots will be counted. I haven't seen Joe down in Atlanta opening those envelopes and challenging.
No, it's a little bit naive, isn't it? On the flip side of that, of course, is there are people who are concerned about the integrity of voting machines. And they've certainly, in the past, at least, there have been races where you had these paperless touchscreen voting machines that were also not reliable, where they could be rigged, to flip votes. So it seems like a no-win situation. What do we do here if you don't trust the machines, but on the other hand, if you mail your ballot in, they might just throw it away? What do we need to do to fix this?
Real simple. I'm going to tell you right now. Don't worry about the machines. First of all, very few states. Pennsylvania is the only place I think left in America where you have what we call push and pray machines. That is, you press a button and you hope that you pray it gets recorded.
Well, that's good to know. I know years ago I interviewed a medieval whistleblower on how they were doing that.
Yeah, so we don't have that problem anymore, really, as a practical matter. But mailing in your vote's insane. Don't go postal. I just told you, according to Caltech and MIT, 22% of all mail-in votes don't get counted. And overwhelmingly, it's voters of color, young people. The chance your ballot, if it's mailed in, will not be counted is 300% higher if you're Black than if you're white, and about 1,200% higher if you are 25 or under versus, an old dude like me above 65.
Is it true nationally, or is this primarily an issue in some of these, southern and swing states, Republican controlled states, or does the same thing happen in places like, California or
well, like I said, California is one of the worst places for counting ballots. So you can't go, like I said, California had 1 million provisional ballots where people were told you can't vote, and 400,000 were rejected. That's the California's report to the federal government. Interestingly, when you ask Alex Padilla how many provisional ballots count, he said, we count them. We count over 90%. And that's been reported without question. But I actually looked up, but it's one thing to bullshit reporters and lie in their faces, because what reporter in America actually checks a fact? They don't. If it's said by an official, where'd you get that baloney fact? From the Secretary of State. Well, of course he's going to lie to you. So in fact, according to the federal government, the papers filed by California says that we reject 40% of provisional ballots. 400,000 provisional ballots were rejected in 2016 by the state of California. So you got the goober states, you got so what we have is a problem with voting in almost every state. Some states actually are fairly honest. Oregon, Washington State, and that's it. Oregon and Washington.
Well, now California did do one thing. They've added a tracking mechanism now, so you can go to Track My Ballot and you can find out if it was received and supposedly will be counted. I know Harvey Wasserman. I interviewed him yesterday, and he said he found out his was rejected because of a non-signature match. So he was able to at least have an opportunity to go and fix that, which is something you couldn't do.
Yeah. How many people? Let me ask you a question, Miriam. So Harvey Wasserman is great because he's a voting rights.
Right. Most people don't know.
And most people, one, don't know they can check. Number two, most people don't know that if it's something like a signature, they can cure their ballot. And who was the forgery expert who said that his signature had been forged? Because when they're saying it doesn't match, what they mean is that it's a forged and fraudulent ballot. So
lots of people just get older and your signature gets a little more scrawly. Right.
Never been challenged. And the other thing is most people don't know how to cure it. But you can't cure every ballot. I can tell you 2 people in San Diego who lost their ballot. Yes, you can look it up. My late mother, actually, in the mayoral race in San Diego, and my sister was a lawyer. My mother was a union leader. My sister's a lawyer. They both lost their mail-in ballots in San Diego because they didn't fully fill in a bubble. So, and there's no way to cure that. They don't say, come back in and fill in the bubble.
So you can't do that. Yeah.
And it's not minor, as you know, the Democrat, and that race, by the way, the Democrat, the woman Donna Fry.
Oh, I remember that.
Won the mayor's race in San Diego.
The Union Tribune pulled the records, approved it, but they didn't count them. And I remember there were people who'd written in Donna Fry, but spelled F-R-Y instead of F-R-Y-E or something. And they said, oh, no, this is not voter intent. They didn't really mean to vote for this is not a vote for Donna Fry. It was completely
So they knocked out
crazy.
5,000 mail-in ballots, which is why. And so the election was flipped, even though clearly 5,000 voters were clearly trying to vote for the Democrat Donna Fry, and they reversed it. So anyone that mails in their ballot because they think it's safer because it's on a piece of paper, guys, you're insane. Don't go postal. And it's a very difficult thing. And by the way, the only reason why Biden won in Georgia, and the only reason why the Democrats even stand a chance in a runoff, is because the African-American leadership of Georgia told people, don't mail in your ballot. It doesn't matter what Biden said. You don't mail in your ballot. You go and vote.
So they went to the polls. They paraded to the polls.
There's like I say, there's all kinds of cockamamie reasons why they can cancel your mail-in ballot. And they do. And that's what I'm concerned with in Georgia. Just as the mayoral race was stolen by the Republicans in San Diego through challenging ballots. And so people are worried that the real issue, and what's interesting to me is the Democrats have not tried to get ballots recounted or ballots requalified that were rejected. They just said, okay. And they're mainly defending against these.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm thinking of a race out here in Santee right now, you know, our area, right? Santee. Mm-hmm. There is a race right now where the Democrat is trailing by 5 votes. 5 votes. She's running against a guy who was the co-founder of Defend East County, which has been sort of, you know, had some racial ties and all of that. And he's the Republican. And so you're saying a candidate like that could go in and ask you a
question. How many provisional ballots were, you know, like I said, California is the provisional ballot champ. How many voters in that race were shunted to provisional ballots?
I should do a public records request and find out. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. And then find out why they were sent to provisional ballots and fight to get them counted. Mm-hmm. The other is how many mail-in ballots were rejected. Mm-hmm. Postage, you know, okay. So in 2016, because we don't have this year's yet, over 100,000 ballots were chucked because of postage due. 141,000 ballots were discarded because, as like with Harvey Wasserman, you're talking about, you know, someone challenged their signatures. 141,000 ballots. We don't have 141,000 people committing forgery. It's nonsense. We have
is it too late right now? I mean, if someone were to go on right now and they looked up, let's say they're a Santee voter and they go look up and find out their ballot was rejected because of a bad signature, but it was really them. Is it too late to fix it?
Probably, but you can usually, you have a week to cure it. Mm-hmm. And as they say, to go in and say, no, that really is me. That's not a fake signature. It's really me. Or you folded the ballot wrong. So it didn't, in other words, we think, oh, it's wonderful to have paper ballots, except for one problem. We don't count paper ballots by hand. We count them by machine. If you fold it wrong or use the wrong color, don't fill in the bubble correctly, the machine kicks it out. You've just lost your vote.
Yeah, the scanner doesn't work.
Scanners are bad news.
Yeah.
And so there's no such thing as a paper election in America. It's either you vote on a machine or you vote on, or it's read by a machine. In Los Angeles, we have a fairly good system in which while you make your choices on a computer that is a touchscreen pad, it's actually a physical printed out paper ballot, but the machine makes sure that it's done in a correct manner so that, you know, it fills in your bubble for you perfectly and make sure that you don't, say, for example, accidentally vote for 2 candidates. Some people, you know, make mistakes and they try to scratch out a choice. Well, they just lost their ballot in most cases, you know. And by the way, every county is different in California. We have 3,500 counties in America. not only does every state have a different method, so does every county. San Diego is not the same as Orange or Sonoma.
Right. Yeah. So, Greg, do you have any final comments here on the national election overall? We've talked a lot about Georgia, but what about all those other states out there? Is there anything else that you've seen that you think people should be aware of here?
Well, go to gregpalast.com. You'll see a lot. I mean, we did an investigation not only in Georgia, but in Wisconsin and Michigan. In Wisconsin, we had great success. That is, we stopped the state from purging 123,000 voters that were going to be purged. And this is a phony purge list.
And what was the margin of victory there for
well,
Biden?
That's the whole thing. Are you ready? I mean,
yeah.
Biden has only won by about 20,000 votes. If you
wow.
And I got to tell you, we actually looked at the race of each of these voters, which you can do using census tract matching, geotagging. The list of voters that they're going to remove from the voter rolls. And by the way, as I said, the list is ridiculous. It's wrong. It says people have moved. That was 123,000. So Biden would have been crushed if
it really makes us wonder if some of these states that Trump apparently won, if Greg Palast had gone in and looked at the voter rolls there and looked for purges, might there be more states out there, do you think?
North Carolina was absolutely stolen, and they stole that Senate seat for Tom Tillis. We did go through the voter rolls, the purge, the massive purge. We're talking over 500,000 voters who were removed from the voter rolls in North Carolina. And from our experience, about half of that is incorrect. And most of those incorrectly removed are young people, Black people, Hispanics, and Asian Americans. Asian Americans are the new target, by the way.
They're voting
probably because they've switched. They used to vote Republican in the main. Now Asian Americans vote about 75% Democratic. So
fascinating.
North Carolina was another steal. Ohio was a steal. And Michigan came very close to being stolen, both the Senate seat and the presidential race. We busted that one. We released our reports there. And again, and by the way, do go to gregpalast.com. I think you want to see those films.
Absolutely.
Go to Leonardo DiCaprio's Instagram story page, I guess they call it. I'm not an Instagram. I'm not Instagram savvy. So,
me either, but a lot of folks are. So
well, I mean,
that's important.
Those old folks.
The old saying by Stalin comes to mind of it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. And thank you, Greg Palast, for being out there, standing up for democracy and fighting to make sure that as many votes get counted as you possibly can. And for listeners or viewers out there who want to support your efforts, I understand you have a fund, right?
Yes, we have a not-for-profit foundation. Listen, you want to make a tax-deductible donation to save the vote in Georgia? I'm not partisan. I just want people to be allowed to vote. Let's try something new. Let's have this time the president was picked by the voters. How refreshing. It looks like it. And let's see if the U.S. Senate can be picked by the voters, not by this racist Jim Crow trickery. So go to gregpalast.com, and there, the Palast Investigative Fund, we're 501c3, tax-deductible donations to our foundation are always appreciated. And I do hope that you guys continue to support KNSJ, your weapon of mass instruction in San Diego.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, as always, it's been a great pleasure to have you on our show. Greg, folks, by the way, has some local roots. His parents used to live right here in La Mesa. Yes. So East County roots. Greg, thanks so much for joining us today on the East County Magazine radio show on KNSJ.